What is up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm Jacob Turner. Joining me, as he always does, very own publisher Andrew Jones. AJ, we're here for the Minnesota preview edition of the UNC football show. Actually, recording this one on Sunday morning. We were typically, as people know, we typically record these on Wednesdays ahead of, Carolina typically playing on a Saturday, but with this being a Thursday evening game for Carolina's season opener, we decided to switch it up a little bit and obviously had to. So we're going to recording this one on Sunday morning. So a little bit different of a vibe than what we typically do. But yeah, man, looking forward to talking a little Carolina versus Minnesota. We're finally can talk a little preview. We've been talking about Carolina the whole off season and all fall camp. Now we can actually look at an opponent for once. So definitely going to be a fun show ahead. But real quickly, AJ, I do want to plug the website, TarHeelIllustrated.com. Make sure, real quickly too, we had an awesome promo last week, AJ. I don't know the total numbers. I haven't talked to you about it yet, but I do think we got a pretty decent amount of signups for that. Anything you want to add on that?
We finished third in the network.
Wow, that's really good.
Rivals has a very massive network. So we finished third in network. Would love to have finished second or first, but we did really well. And the bottom line is the regular price is still an incredible deal.
Oh yeah.
So just $833. It was 1 year for $330 a month, which was pretty good. So we had a lot of people sign up. I'm excited to get some feedback from those people and see how much they enjoy the site and hanging out on the message boards with people that actually know how to spell the players' names. They know what year they are and
it's a little bit different.
What position they play, and it's a different level of discourse on the premium message boards than you find other places that are not premium.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. And I love to sell that because that's actually the feedback I get from people. A lot of them. I mean, I love the boards. Like everybody in the boards, they may not always agree. Some are a little bit more ornery than others, but they know at least what they're talking about. Like everyone in there can spell. Most of them can spell Connor Harrell's name. They know it's an ER, not an OR.
I do. I've had to look that one up countless times because I'm always like, it's the E, and then is it the two L's at the end? Is the two R's in there? He is one of the trickier names to spell. I will give people credit on that. But no, that is an awesome, a big perk of being a part of the community is, again, if I look at it like this, AJ, if you're paying a monthly subscription to be signed up for something like that, you're obviously a pretty diehard and a big fan. So I would think you probably know how to spell half the players' names. I would hope so, at least. And obviously we have that at our awesome community. So yeah, we appreciate everybody taking advantage of that promo. Again, if you didn't get signed up, I'm sure we'll run more promos throughout the season, but you can still get signed up $833 a month.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have that many, as you know. So
yeah, it seems like every once in a while, like kind of around basketball season, we might do one maybe, but it doesn't happen too often. But again,
we knew it last year.
Yeah, that's why we always tell people to get signed up during these promos because, I mean, it's just the deals are so good. And, you never know when we might have another one. We may never have a promo as good as that one again. So
I can tell you there's nothing planned right now. And a lot of it has to be approved by the network. So
True. Maybe something will come up. But as of right now,
did one.
Heard it here first.
A pretty good one. So they're not going to do it again for a while.
Yeah, you heard it here first, guys. If you missed it, unfortunate, but you can still come on and sign up. And again, send us a Venmo if you want to. I know we've talked about that a lot, but if you just want to support and don't want to be locked into a monthly subscription, I completely understand that, but we'd much rather you sign up because you get so much more perks for doing it. But you can shoot us a Venmo as well at Tar Heel Illustrated. You'll see the little Venmo icon pop up on the screen, or it already has. So you guys can easily go over there, and links in the description as well for that. So again, big thank you to everybody signed up, and come on over if you haven't already. Great time to do so with football season about to get in full swing. And you always know when football season starts, basketball is not far away. It doesn't make any sense, but basketball will be here like that for you.
Basketball official visits are here soon.
I know, man, and that's a
lot of them too. A lot of them, and David says there's nobody better than him covering that stuff. I can't wait for David to roll his sleeves up and dive into that stuff. But
yeah, he loves that.
We got to roll our sleeves up and dive into Minnesota Gold Gophers. It's just in a few days. I am so excited about going there, Jacob.
I bet you are.
Covered a game there before, so it's going to be really neat to see what their game day experience is like and be inside the stadium, which is nice. It's fairly new. They've got some neat little traditions up there, and I think it's a pretty good football team. Should be a good game, that's for sure. There's two teams that probably have a similar number of question marks, but but I think Carolina's got a lot of answers to some of those question marks.
Oh, absolutely, and we'll preview that game a little bit later on during the show. First thing I want to talk about is this. Obviously, we did a show earlier this week on Wednesday, put that one out where we talked a lot about some, recent media, you talking to some recent position coaches and some other stuff kind of going around. So this is probably going to be a little bit more of a shorter show because we're only going to hit on really one big topic before we dive into the preview. And then we'll talk about the game along with that as well. So don't think this one's going to go an hour and a half like we did a couple weeks ago. I'll put it that way. But you never know with us. We easily could do that.
Especially if you do 27-minute promo reads.
Yeah, which we're actually really, really good at.
I had someone reach out to me and say, you guys spent a lot of time promoting that thing.
Yeah,
said,
I'm like, hey, man.
We probably need to cut it down some, but that's okay. I mean, it's I do it all the time. When I do them by myself and I do the drops, I'll sometimes finish and go back and say, man, I spent like an hour or a minute and 20 seconds on that thing by myself.
Yeah, and
too long.
I think some of the diehard listeners probably. I do this on my own podcast, so I'm going to go ahead and throw my hands up. A lot of pods I listen to. I mean, I know probably a lot of diehard listeners probably just skip through it in the beginning, which again, I get it. A lot of our diehard listeners are probably already signed up at TarHeelIllustrated.com, so they don't have to hear us sit here and spiel about it. But again, yeah, like I always say, AJ, it's a business, so we got to promote it a little bit. We always try to do it in the beginning. So,
costs money to get to Minnesota.
Yeah, exactly. But AJ, I want to talk about the QB position first, because I think that's really been the biggest thing that kind of came out of Mac's press conference on Friday. For me, that was kind of the biggest talking point. So that's what I want to hit on real quick. And a lot of, I don't even want to say mixed reaction from fans, because at least from the fan reaction that I've seen, I think there's a lot of frustration around the quarterback situation, it not being announced, and why are they playing two quarterbacks? What does that mean? Well, oh my God, we're going to struggle. We don't have a starting quarterback going into the year. I think it's a fascinating thing from a fan perspective I call it an overreaction, because I think it's an overreaction. Let's see how it plays out first before we sit here and criticize everything about them not, announcing a QB. And by the way, they're not announcing it because Minnesota's not announcing a depth chart. It makes total sense. So no need to rehash that. But just to go back and say what Mac said, the plan is to play two quarterbacks against Minnesota. And he also added that the plan going into the whole season potentially is to have packages for two different quarterbacks, with that obviously being Max Johnson and Connor Harrell. Those are the two guys. Jacoby Criswell, we've always said it, just wasn't really ever a part of that, really truly a part of that starting quarterback conversation. From what you've seen in open practice.
There's never been a three. Anyone that said it's been a three quarterback race, they're incorrect. It's never been a three quarterback race.
It never was. He was brought in for depth, and that's just how it's played out. But what did you make of it? Because we were talking a little bit before the show, and I think some of the overreaction from Carolina fans was them not really understanding maybe the full context of the quote. And I get that, because a lot of the times people don't actually listen to the press conference. What they do instead is they'll just go on Twitter and look at your, tweets from it as you kind of live tweeted, or other sites that do it. They'll do a very similar thing, and they'll kind of take that and not really understand the full context of it. So for fans who maybe haven't listened to it, or maybe did listen to it and are still a little bit kind of confused as to what Mac's trying to say, is like, are they going to play two quarterbacks because they have to? Are they playing two quarterbacks because they want to? Are they playing two quarterbacks because nobody's really stood out and they're just still in a position where, well, we don't really know who the better quarterback is? What is your kind of take on, from Mac Brown's press conference? What is your take on the situation and how it's kind of played out during fall camp?
I think the live tweeting, this was one of those times where the live tweeting kind of created a reaction, because Mac technically said we're going to play two quarterbacks initially, and then very quickly clarified. But when you're tweeting from a press conference, I've got my camera set up and I'm sitting there and I'm typing, and I'm also posting on our message board. I post even more on our message board. Mac's right in front of me. He's 6-7 feet in front of me, and he's doing it, and he's talking. And you can only put so much in there. And a lot of times I paraphrase what he says, because I don't want to put quotations there if I have a word wrong, because that would be inaccurately quoting him. And he clarified soon after that the plan is to have both quarterbacks ready. They're not going to go into the whole season saying, okay, well, Connor's going to get X number of series, Mac's going to, at least right now they're not. What I fully understood him to say is they have a starting quarterback, but they need to have the other guy prepared. And he used as an example Connor going into the bowl game last year, where he basically hadn't played. Other than Campbell, he hadn't really played. So he was starting from a position of almost no experience in a bowl game against a quality opponent. He used an example when he was at Texas when Colt McCoy got hurt in the national championship game, and he had to bring in a backup quarterback that he regretted not giving that many snaps to during the season because they were trying to get Colt McCoy the Heisman Trophy. And that's a direct quote from Mac. We were trying to get him the Heisman. So in this situation where you've got a guy that has a little bit of experience now as the backup, that being Connor, they're going to want to get him some opportunities to get on the field. I think the other thing here, too, Jacob, is that Max Johnson's been banged up in his career. He's been injured in multiple seasons. So you've got to have someone ready to go in because on every snap, if history is an indicator, and it usually is in this stuff, that there's a chance you may have to go to your backup anyway. And we're saying that obviously we believe Max will be the starter on Thursday night. So, in fact, I believe he's a clear starter. So that's why they're doing this. And they also have two different packages. They have to make sure they have packages because they're different players. Mm-hmm. One's right-handed, one's left-handed. One's 6'5". They list the other one at 6'2", but last year was listed at 6 feet and a half inch, in between 6 feet, 6'1". And Connor grew an inch and a half according to the official roster. And when I looked him eye to eye, he didn't seem any taller than me. So you've got different skill. Connor's a guy who could take off and burn. Max can run well too, but that's not Max's game. Max is a check down guy. Connor's I don't know 100% sure what kind of quarterback he is. We haven't seen enough of him yet to really get a handle on, okay, here he is as a drop back guy. We need more evidence more intel on that to see him actually be in this situation. So Matt clarified, and he was asked some questions about, so you're saying that you don't really know who the quarterback is? He said, no, that's not what I said. What I said was, we're going to have plans for both, and they need to be prepared to play both to get the second guy some experience, and just in case things don't go well with the first guy. Mm-hmm. So when you put someone in, if they play really well, he said, and I believe the quote was, if he's Drake May, then we stick with him. Yeah. So there is, I'm not going to guarantee you that you'll see Connor Thursday night. I'm not going to because if Max goes in there and the offense is humming,
no need for it.
Their way down the field. They're not going to make a change. Although if he played a series, it would be similar to what SMU did last night. Mm-hmm. SMU's got two quarterbacks they really like. Preston Stone's the more experienced guy, and he was the starter. Then they put in Kevin Jennings in their third or fourth series, and he let him do a touchdown drive, and you didn't see him again. That was his series. I could see a scenario where they do something like that because they got to get reps. And I'm long-winded answer here, but the value in giving Connor a series in every game is that means he sees a unique difference, a defense each week. Mm-hmm. So sometimes one series in 8 games is better than 8 series in one game. Mm-hmm. Because it's going to see different defenses, different environments. He'll feel more experienced down the road if he gets a series in each game as opposed to a bunch in one game.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I'm going to go back a couple weeks too about this quarterback situation because I put out some tweet and I forgot what it was. It was something to do with the quarterback, and it was interesting that the replies that I did get from Carolina fans on Twitter was more of like a surprise that I believed and that we believed that Johnson was going to be the starter. The consensus from the replies I got was no, Harold, like from fans who were getting, this is because they don't know and they're basing this off what they want instead. It's, oh no, like Connor Harrell's definitely going to be the starter. The amount of replies I get like that is like, wait, you actually think Max Johnson's going to be the starter? And I think you have to step back for a second, AJ, because you just hit the nail on the head too. I think there's a belief or a want to believe from fans that Harrell is this, that is maybe this awesome guy in the wings and is going to come in and he's going to just take over and Carolina's going to never skip a beat. And again, maybe that does end up happening down the road. We have no idea what's going to happen over these next 12 games. We do believe Max Johnson's a starter and will start against Minnesota, but what happens after that is completely up in the air. It's a 50-50 coin toss. But the reason I think you have to step back is you have to look at it and say what you just said. Connor Harrell hasn't played. He's played little to no college football. Max Johnson has played a lot of college football and has thrown for nearly 3,000 yards as a sophomore at LSU. And again, injuries have plagued him, and that's one of the reasons that he's had some issues and had some consistency problems over the last couple of years. And if you're just a stat sheet guy and you go look at his stats the last couple of years, you say, he's only really played in like 12 games in 2 years, and he, didn't do a lot in those games, and that's because of injuries. So obviously that has to be a concern, too, because he has proven and has shown that injuries have been a problem throughout his career. And again, I think this is why this situation is such an interesting one. But I say all that to say that I think when you step back and you take your Carolina hat off and you just look at it from just a very level-headed mindset, and you say, okay, they brought a transfer into Max Johnson, who's experienced. I don't care how you look at it. He's really experienced. He has years left as well to play at Carolina. And you also got this guy over here in Connor Harrell, who you like some things you've seen, but what have you seen him against Campbell and then against West Virginia in a bowl game when, half the team half the starters weren't playing anyway? It kind of makes, I think, again, when you look at it from a level-headed perspective, the Max Johnson as the guy makes a lot more sense to me, at least to start the year, than a Connor Harrell is, because at least you have a little bit of an idea of what Max has. And we talked a lot about this off camera before we started recording, AJ. Max Johnson's stats people talk about Max Johnson like he's like this horrible quarterback coming in. And again, if you actually break down his stats and look at it, that's just not the case. Again, injuries have caused, some of those, incomplete seasons over the last couple of years where you're like, man, he really hasn't played a lot or played a ton or as much as he could have and should have over the last couple of years. But there are intangibles and stats you can look at and feel good about what Max Johnson can potentially do. So I've just always found it so interesting that the consensus from the fan base, at least from what I've seen and what I see the most on Twitter, is Harrell's the guy. You're crazy if you think Johnson's going to start. But I don't really know what that's based on when I try to step back and look at it. I think people just don't think Max Johnson is that good. I think that's ridiculous.
Connor's eye candy because he's fast and he can run. And a lot of fan bases want the guy that can run. They want the guy that can be electric. They think everybody's Lamar Jackson when they're not.
And I get it. I mean, I can understand that. Yeah.
And there's there are a lot of things to like about Connor as a quarterback. Mm-hmm. And the running part is one of them. A guy that can bail you out of a lot of bad situations. Drake and Sam bailed Carolina out of some bad situations, get first downs. So Darian Durant used to do that a lot for Carolina. Marquise Williams did it all the time. Having a quarterback that can run can stress the crap out of a defense. So, yeah, I get it. I think that there are a lot of things to like about Connor, and I believe that that's why this was a legitimate battle when fall camp started a month ago. So 100% I'm on that. Now, as far as Max's career, let's remember a couple of things here. The guy won the job at LSU and won the job at Texas A&M. He also was in two highly chaotic situations in those programs.
Yeah, to say the least.
Look what was coming to an end at LSU. Look what crashed and burned at A&M while he was there. Mm-hmm. Now he's entered a far more stable situation, stable environment. I would imagine having a meeting in Mac Brown's office is a lot different than having a meeting in Jimbo's office when he wasn't All right? Yeah. First of all, Jimbo talks so damn fast, you can't understand half what he's saying anyway. If they bring back the old FedEx commercials, Jimbo Fisher has to be the guy.
Oh, he's got to be the guy.
How fast he talks. When I covered FSU a little bit when I was at Fox doing the whole ACC, man, it was hard transcribing.
You had to slow down the audio to half
speed. Hard transcribing. Like every word, I'd stop and type the word and go to the next one. Anyway, Max in his career, let's look at it a couple of different ways. Number one, 47 touchdown passes, 12 interceptions.
It's good.
788 pass attempts, 12 interceptions. He also, and I've done in like massive deep diving on him, 60 drops in his career, and that's a little higher than what would be the average per attempt for a quarterback. So if you look at the average, his career passing completion percentage is 60.5%, which is not great, but it's not wretched, but it's not real good. However, if you give him the average number of drops in college football, his completion percentage goes up to 62.1%, which is fairly respectable. It's also in a situation where they had some unstable offenses in unstable environments, and he played her a lot. He broke his ribs last year and played again a rib last year, played again the next week at Ole Miss, broke a few more, and that was it.
Yeah.
So the guy played with broken ribs last year. So that's going to affect you. And I also think that's the kind of I'm not a big fan of using the word warrior with sports, but that's a warrior mentality that he has. And I think that's one of the appealing things that Carolina had with him, because that's what they're trying to instill more in the program. I'm not saying Connor doesn't have it. I'm saying that there is proof that Max does have that. So I believe that they feel very comfortable with Max checking off the first 5 or 6 boxes. And that's what's crucial. If you have 12 boxes for a quarterback, sometimes the eye candy one checks the middle boxes and a couple of the really neat ones at the bottom that are like dessert to the meal. Mm-hmm. But you've got to check out the basic food groups at the beginning and work your way down when you're looking at a quarterback. And I believe that Max does that for them. And I believe that's what the staff sees in him. He's a guy that can go through his reads. He can check down. He sees the middle of the field really well. He's a guy that can make the short dump to the tight end, or Omari Hampton, who's back in pass protection and releases, and he drags out to the middle right there, and there's a little dump down, and suddenly he's in space. Max can see that stuff. Connor doesn't see it as well. I've seen it in practice. Mm-hmm. Max sees it better than Connor does. He's 6'5" versus 6'1". He sees it better. Mm-hmm. He reads it a little bit better, in my opinion, at least based on what I've seen. I haven't been in every practice, and I'm not those guys. They know 1,000 times more, obviously. But this is also based on some things I've heard as well. So I think people need to sit back and not worry about what Max did before, because none of that has anything to do with what happens in Huntington Bank Stadium Thursday night. Now, if he goes into that game and he's throwing the ball away and he's missing guys that are wide open, and if John Copenhaver is slanting over the middle, crossing over the middle, and he's wide open and Max throws the ball 10 feet over his head, well, you're going to see Connor Harrell.
Yeah.
So don't worry about it. Just let it play out, see how this thing works. I do think that what they run with Max might be slightly different at times than what they run with Connor because of their skill sets. You have one guy that's a shotgun guy. The other guy's going to be a little bit more play. One guy's an RPO guy. The other guy's going to be a little more play action, that kind of stuff. But I'm looking forward to it. And I hope we do see Connor some, because I want to see if there's any immediate tweaks and differences with what they run, with what their alignment is. Do they use what tight ends do they use more with Connor as opposed to Max? Do they use 13 personnel with Max but never with Connor? I would love to see things like that.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. It's one of the biggest things I'm looking forward to. I think it's always, from our perspective at least, as journalists who cover the team, it's fascinating. Even more fascinating sometimes going into a season when you have these question marks. And it's not only question marks at quarterback. We've talked about it. We don't need to rehash it. It's O-line. It's how improved would the defense be, if at all. Defensive line, what exactly are they going to get out of that group? I think there's just so many things where there's some nice parts, but we don't really know what's going to happen with those positions and with those groups until we actually see it in the game, which I think makes it even more fascinating when you can finally play a actual football game instead of just talking about it for a month straight during fall camp. So, I want to dive.
By the way, you mentioned O-line. If the O-line is miserable and can't pass protect, you play the guy that can at least make something out of nothing, right?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit too.
That's more Connor than it would be Max. Although Max can run. I've seen Max run. Mm-hmm. He can run, but he's not Connor. Connor's more a sprinter. Max is more a runner.
Mm-hmm. Which I think also explains, I tweeted out too. I think it's just a fluid situation. I think Carolina knows who the starter is going to be against Minnesota, who they want to start, and who I think they would hope can kind of carry this thing throughout the season. And Max Johnson, that's who we think it is. But I think ultimately when you're reading the Max quotes and you listen to it, I still think it's a fluid situation because they're talking about playing 2 QBs. And like you just said, AJ, if Max Johnson goes 0 for 5 or 1 for 6 in his first pass attempts against Minnesota, you'd probably see a change, and you probably should see a change. So I think that is why it's a situation in a position that is going to be so intriguing to follow. But I also think from a fan perspective, I think that's why fans are a little bit concerned and a little bit, I use the word uptight about the quarterback position, because they're like, wait, Carolina's not naming a starter. Like, what does that mean? And like, who's going to start and who's the guy? And I think you're just going to have, like you just said, we're just going to have to see how it plays out and see who takes advantage of the opportunity. Does Max take advantage of the opportunity? And if he doesn't, does Connor come in and take advantage of the opportunity? If neither of them take advantage of the opportunity, then what happens then? So it's a very, very interesting situation, to say the least. That is not, I don't think we're really going to know after game one, really. I mean, Max could come in, start, and have a really good game, but Does that mean he has a good rest of the season? I mean, there's no guarantee that's the case.
I think there's situational aspects to both of them. However, I would say the most consistent reaction we've gotten on our board, on Twitter, on Facebook is that, oh, great. That means they don't have it. The old adage, if you have two quarterbacks.
Literally looking at a tweet right now that says
that could be true. We don't know. But I don't think they see it that way. They know who the starter is. Mm-hmm. It goes back to PJ. PJ wanted to play some games, so they're going to go ahead and play the game with him. Max said it wouldn't be fair to his team to put that information out there if the other guy's not going to give them whatever little advantage they would get, which would be very minuscule in my opinion, because there's no way on earth that Minnesota staff hasn't fully prepared for either one of them. Like they've had plans in place for both for 3 months.
Exactly. It's the first game of the year. I mean,
that's not going to change right now.
Yeah, no, it isn't. But again, it's the college football coaches, man. It's the little things and little advantages they can get. It's another fascinating part of college football.
All planning the what?
The D-Day invasion, man. That's one of my favorite quotes you've ever read. Oh, I love it. It's just top secret information folders getting passed around the Keaton Football Center and Minnesota as well. I love it. That's what makes college football so good. Football in general, I should say. I'm sure it's the same thing at the next level too, but in high school too, probably a little bit. Let's talk about.
Oh, wait, I've got some black sand from Normandy Beach in my office.
Do you really? I've actually, I do right here as well. I've got some sand from Utah Beach. Yeah. So, yeah, I went there a few years ago with a buddy of mine for about a month.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
Yeah, man. I'm a huge World War II buff. So that stuff right there I'll never get rid of that. Let's just put it that way. AJ, let's talk a little Minnesota. Let's dive into the preview portion here. And real quickly, too, I did mention it in the last football show, but I want to go ahead and plug this. We're going to be answering 2 questions from fans at the end of every UNC football show. It is available exclusively to our subscribers at Tar Heel Illustrated first. And if we don't receive, enough questions or questions that we feel that we should, are worth answering on a podcast, we're also going to tweet it out as well. So we'll be answering those questions later on as well, because we do have 2 pretty good questions I'm looking forward to kind of diving into. But that'll be at the end of every football show. So just want to put that out there. Be on the lookout for that if you're not a subscriber, because that will more than likely go out on Twitter every week. Not all the time, because it's available to our subscribers first. But if you are a subscriber at TarIllustrated.com, look for that. We're going to post that every Monday during a regular game week. So look for that, because we do want to hear from you guys. And I think as the season goes on and we get deeper into it, I think we'll continue to get some more questions, especially if Carolina's having a good season. But let's dive into the Golden Gophers coming off 6-7 season last year. UNC obviously, I'm not going to say whooping them, but it was a pretty convincing win in Chapel Hill last year, 31-13. Minnesota picked to finish 12th out of 18 teams in the Big Ten. And I've got more stuff on the offense. So we'll start with the offense. And again, we're not going to spend a ton of time on Minnesota, because as we've known and gone to see over the years, Carolina fans don't care as much, don't want to hear us talk about Minnesota for 30 minutes, but we do need to sit here and talk about them, because it does, obviously has a lot of relevance with this is the opponent that Carolina is going to be facing. But 8 p.m. kick in Minneapolis on Fox Thursday night. Again, it's 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the time you'll be on, AJ, it actually starts at 7 in Minnesota, but I think most people watching this probably live on the East Coast anyway. But offensively first, let's dive into this. I think that there's some intriguing parts, and there's also some kind of similarities between Carolina and Minnesota on both sides of the ball, and just the team overall that we'll talk about a little bit later. But I think when you look at strengths, AJ, I think you have to start with the O-line, and I think you have to start with the rushing attack, because Minnesota struggled to throw the ball last year. They've also got a new quarterback coming in Max Brosmer, New Hampshire transfer, a little bit of an unknown, had a really good year last year at New Hampshire, one of the best quarterbacks at that level last season, but bit of an unknown in what he's going to get, what he's going to bring to Minnesota, just like it's a bit of an unknown what Carolina has at quarterback right now. But the strengths of this offense, it's the running game. 2 leading rushers returning for Minnesota, Darius Taylor and Jordan Newman, and also 4 starting offensive linemen coming back, including one who is projected to be a first-round draft pick over the next couple of years. And I've seen a lot of lists. He's one of the best players, if not the best player on their team, and in terms of the next level stats. So there's a lot of reasons offensively for Carolina to really have to game plan that running attack, because I think that's where it's going to start for Minnesota. And I think, you get some early rushes early on, you have some success with that running game. They're going to keep pounding it on the ground until Carolina shows that they can stop it. And I think when you have a new quarterback like Brosmer coming in, that's kind of your worst case scenario, because that gives him more comfort and it allows Minnesota offensively to not have to worry about, throwing the ball and kind of rely on that. So if Carolina can stop the run early and do that relatively consistently throughout the game, I think that's going to stress Minnesota's offense, because right now I think what they have passing attack wise, especially you look at their struggles last year in that respect, I just you can't sit here and say it's a strength of that offense. So I think that's a best case scenario from a Carolina perspective. But AJ, we'll hit on the defense in a second, because I know you have a little bit more stats on the defense. Then we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the comparisons between these two teams going into the season, because I do think there are some similarities with some of the unknowns about these two teams right now. But I think offensively, I don't think Carolina's going to go into the game fearing Minnesota. I don't think they should in any way, shape, or form. But I do think it's a pretty simple one, in my opinion, of if Minnesota has success running the ball, could be a long night for Carolina, because, man, it looks like they've got some nice pieces in that respect.
They do. And I wouldn't really look at last year's passing situation at Minnesota and link it to right now at all, because that quarterback's gone. Mm-hmm. In fact, he's at Rutgers, I believe.
Is that where he ended up? Yeah.
Yeah. And Brosmer was runner-up for the Walter Payton Award, which is the Heisman for FCS. If you're a quarterback and you're the runner-up for that award, that means you could spread that thing around.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And they had a decent team and everything in New Hampshire. And there are a lot of guys. Go look at NFL rosters right now. Anybody, New Hampshire. Go look at NFL rosters. Just see where all these guys are from.
Everywhere.
Now, there's also cases like Tony Muskett, who came from Monmouth, I believe it was, and struggled some at Virginia and just lost the job. Calandria, I believe, is starting now for UVA, the sophomore over the more experienced Muskett. This guy's better than Muskett was. So I'm giving you two different sides of how it could play out. If I'm Carolina, I would expect this guy to play well. I would expect him to find his receivers. I would expect them to throw some short stuff early to get him in a rhythm and get him some confidence. But nothing's going to give him more confidence than running the ball.
Yeah.
And Darius Taylor was his first team preseason All Big Ten. So you've got a first team All Big Ten tackle and you got a first team All Big Ten running back. It's not a bad way to start.
No.
Especially when you're PJ Fleck and you love to pound the football. Mac Brown did a really nice job of sort of getting people to understand this guy comes from the Greg Schiano world of college football, and that's physicality. That's running the ball. That's chewing glass at the line of scrimmage, guys. And that's what you're going to get from Minnesota. North Carolina is going to have to be physical. If you watch the SMU-Nevada game, Nevada was more physical. And that's why SMU, with a lot more talent but a little too finesse, had to fight for its life to get a win. Georgia Tech was more physical than Florida State. That's why Georgia Tech won that game. They won that game at the point of attack. Carolina's biggest question marks as a whole, I think, are at the line of scrimmage, the point of attack on both sides of the ball. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say defense is because you got a bunch of guys that are uber talented, but how many of them have actually come close to living up to expectations? And it's something that they openly talk about. So that's where this game's going to be. And offensively for Minnesota, they're going to give the ball to Darius Taylor on a dive play or whatever, an inside zone run, first play. That's probably what they're going to do. They may throw a quick out and get the quarterback a toss, but that's what if Carolina can't stop it, PJ Fleck's not going to put that thing up in the air. No. He's not going to give Kamen Rucker a chance to get the quarterback. Mm-hmm. He's a good football coach. He knows what he's doing. So Carolina must at some point stop the run, slow the run, stop the run, put them behind the sticks so they've got to throw the ball around. Then we'll find out what Brosmer has. I will say this. If they can get early, if they can stop the run early and force him to throw early, and they show him a level of athleticism on defense that he's never seen before, that could really throw him off. And this is one of those games where special teams blunders, turnovers are going to be huge. Inopportune penalties are going to be huge, simply because I think these two teams are fairly even in a lot of ways. Especially when you look at Minnesota being at home in front of a raucous, frothed up, liquored up nighttime crowd, that kind of evens things out a little bit. So Stopping the run is 100%. That's it for North Carolina. Stop the run. Make the New Hampshire kid beat you through the air and throw against what you think is the strength of your defense, which is the secondary and linebacker, the back seven.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that's the key for North Carolina going into this one. Let's flip it over to defense, Edge. I know you've got a little bit more stats on the defense that you can kind of talk about, but what is your thoughts from Minnesota and kind of what you've seen on what they have on the defensive side of the ball? Is it a pretty good unit, or is it a unit that, maybe has some question marks? I know they do have a new defensive coordinator as well, kind of like the Tar Heels.
Yeah, I think they've coordinator. I've spent more time learning more about him recently than the personnel on that side of the ball, because the scheme on defense has so much to do with how the personnel is kind of brought out, right?
I think Carolina fans know that very well.
I think they know that very well. And they had a pretty decent defense last year, and their coordinator left Michigan State, which pissed off a lot of Minnesota fans. But they brought in a guy, Corey Heatherman, who was a linebacker coach at Rutgers the last 2 years. So he's got a little Shiano stuff going on now too. He was DC at JMU in 2019 through 21, where his defenses all three were ranked in the top 8 nationally. Now they're going up against different level competition, but that means that they had schemes that they executed. So he has schemes at work. He has schemes that his kids executed, so he can coach, he can communicate, and there was not any drop off. They were 1, 5, and 8 overall in total defense. That's pretty good. So he's a former quarterback in college. So now he's a defensive coordinator. You don't see that a whole lot. So he's a guy that designs defenses with the mind of a quarterback at play, which I think is fascinating. He's an up-and-comer. He's considered one of the better young coaches in college football. He'll be a head coach at some point. So what he does with their personnel is going to be interesting. His past, his history is blitz, come at you, aggressive, force you to make plays to beat you instead of having your scheme or your plan beat you. Force them to make plays. There's a difference between here's our game plan and we're going to work it we're going to execute it to perfection, as opposed to our guys have to make plays constantly to beat you. There's a big difference. And that's what he wants to force opponents to do. So that might be interesting if Max doesn't perform well early, because the offensive line, which is as green as it gets, green is the green in that Final Four sign behind me. If they struggle picking it up, and Omarion or Darwin Barlow, whoever's in the game, struggles to pick it up, and if they have to keep a tight end back all the time to pass block, and so they're never releasing, and it minimizes the number of options for a quick dump out, it could be an issue. It could be trouble. Next thing you know, we could see Connor because he could escape. So it's going to be very interesting. 2 coaches, 2 new coordinators in defense. Both of them want to be highly aggressive. One of them disguises more, and the other one just pins the ears back and goes after you. We're going to breathe fire, and we're coming right after you. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see which offense is able to adapt to that better. You got 2 new quarterbacks, and you got 2 new defensive coordinators who both are very aggressive. And yellers, screamers and yellers, which is always fun.
Yeah, do you think the key for, just feeding off that, do you think the key for North Carolina is an offense? I know you just talked about it a little bit, but do you think it's kind of a similar approach for North Carolina than we just talked about with Minnesota, where on paper, at least, your strength is at running back? I know Carolina has a lot more question marks at offensive line than maybe Minnesota does, just because you got a lot of guys returning, and again, a really high end draft pick, is one of the tackles over there. But do you think Carolina's approach going into it is, hey, we got this kind of new look, this new coordinator we're going up against? We haven't really seen him before. This is Minnesota fans haven't seen him before because it's his first season, but we know we have a preseason All-American running back, Omarion Hampton. We know what he can do. Let's try to establish that run game early, which if you can do that, you can also start to ease your quarterback in a little bit easier than saying, hey, we can't run against Minnesota. We don't have the personnel to do that. We got to throw from minute one. I don't think Carolina's going to take that approach. Do you think, both teams might be approaching it offensively and from a similar kind of standpoint?
Basketball and teams playing a zone, the best way to beat the zone and pull them out of it is to hit a bunch of threes, a bunch of perimeter shots. In football, if you're going to beat a team that's hell-bent on blitzing like crazy and coming after you, well, if you're running between tackles, and nullifies that completely and essentially takes them out of it. So, yeah, I think both teams are going to want to establish the run. Both teams have running backs that they love. One team has more experience in the offensive line, but Max said it again the other day, and he's
hell bent on it, man.
We love our offensive line. Now he did say now if y'all. He's planning ahead just in case, right? Gotta love it. I love him because he's been doing it a million times. He knows how this is done. But if they don't play, I'm not going to do a Mac impersonation. That's Adam Smith's job. But if we don't play well, the offensive line doesn't do well. You're all going to come back and say, "Hey, you said they were going to be really good."
He did. He
gave himself an out the other day. However, everybody believes they're going to be really good. So if they are above average, and you got Amari in there, they should be able to move the sticks enough, keep the defense off the field a little bit, and take away part of what is a big part of what is Minnesota's plan. That's to pin the ears back and get after you. Now, it's a very different Minnesota than last year. So that's why if you pull up the Minnesota game from last year, there are not a whole lot of things to take from it, to be honest with you. Individual players, which is what the staff has done. And you could definitely take something from watching Darius Taylor, who ran for 138 yards against Star Eagles last year.
Yeah.
But as far as Minnesota's defensive scheme and approach, that's useless.
Yeah, it's just going to be completely different. Just like Carolina's is going to be completely different too. But
absolutely.
It's fascinating to me because last thing I'll say about this, and then we'll move on to the fan questions and we'll do predictions after that. They're very similar to Carolina in my opinion going into this game because I think you start with the record or maybe predictions for what this team can be. It's a bit of a mixed bag from what you can find in Minnesota. Just like I think Carolina's a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, I saw anywhere from 6-6 to 9-4. I think you can make a case for Carolina in that respect. I think Carolina, schedule lines up nicely, but as you did a drop on a couple days ago, it also could be a very similar situation to what we've seen the last couple of years because some of their tougher games do come towards the end of the season, but you can also compare new D coordinators. What is that going to look like? Are both defenses, Minnesota and Carolina? Question marks there. New quarterbacks for both teams. Strengths are at running back. I think the difference between maybe Carolina and Minnesota, like we've talked about, is the line because Carolina's O-line is so green and Minnesota's is not. So I think these are two programs going into this game where there are a lot of similarities between the two in a lot of different ways, which I think makes this opening matchup so fascinating. And I've predicted, in my season predictions and other things I've done, I've predicted Carolina to lose this one. And again, I guess we can go ahead and do predictions for this game since I'm bringing it up right now.
Yeah, but we haven't put the stat picks out yet.
I'll do a little sneak peek. That's what my prediction is for this one. But I could easily also see Carolina winning this one because for me, it's just – these teams are so similar in a lot of different ways, not really similar in maybe their strengths and everything, but similar with the question marks you have about them going into this one.
And they're similar in that this is an enormous opener for both teams.
Yes.
I think it's bigger for Minnesota simply because their schedule's tougher. And if Minnesota wants to get to a bowl game, that path is a lot more challenging if they don't beat North Carolina. Mm-hmm. For UNC, there is I think a more navigation. You can
navigatable. Is that a word?
Navigatable. Is that a word?
I don't know. I'm gonna Google that one.
Carolina's schedule would be easier to navigate after Minnesota to get to a bowl in Minnesota's, and so Minnesota's they got Oregon. It's just having fun. They got Oregon. They got a huge schedule. And the fact that they got Oregon is just wild for a Big Ten game.
Big Ten conference too. There's a lot of really good teams. I know ACC is going to have a good year too. I know you believe that too, but
I think the ACC is going to be really good this year. I think the middle of the league is fantastic. Is so much better than it's been. Okay, so I think it's a huge opener for both teams. A little bit more pressure on Minnesota, I believe, in this opener than North Carolina, simply because of what comes up quickly afterward. Carolina could hang out and improve and get better and win for a while before they face a game that they really have a chance at losing. That's not going to be the case for Minnesota. So I'm looking forward to it, man. I want to see which team does something what we perceive right now to be out of character to get the win.
Agreed.
Does someone win? If they do that, does that mean they win the game? Did they do something out of character to win? Or is this game going to be lost? So many openers are lost. Look at Nevada with the kickoff return last night. Mm-hmm. The kid calls for a fair catch and drops the ball, and then picks it up at the 1 yard line, starts running with it, but the ball was blown dead because he called for a fair catch. Nevada had to stop at started their own one, and they ended up getting a safety. It changes the game. So it's stuff like that, I think, ultimately that will determine the outcome here. And Carolina has hit more on special teams. They haven't hit the return men, but they've hit everybody else. They've gone live on special teams more than they have at any time before. So they have made a concerted effort to get that punt shield unit in shape on the punt team, because they had a couple of punts blocked last year that were costly. Carolina's put a tremendous emphasis on special teams. And I think, Larry Porter, his group has to do well, or there are going to be some issues there. So that's probably what this thing comes down to, Jacob.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be who makes fewest mistakes.
Yeah, especially in a season opener.
Carolina's an older, more mature team.
Yeah, that's a good point, too. It will be a counteracting that, too. It's a tough environment to go into. I know that place is going to be rocking Thursday night national television, and Carolina's going to have to deal with that, too, which you can kind of look at that both ways. Yeah. Yeah.
Going out and they're giving out gold pom-poms. Everyone wants to.
Yeah, that place is going to be packed, man. It's going to be a fun one for you to be in. And again, a fun game to watch from any perspective, especially with it being nationally televised. All right, AJ, last thing, we're going to wrap this up with two of the fan questions that I mentioned. Both of these actually came from Twitter, so I'm going to go ahead and read these off. And this kind of building off what we honestly were just talking about in some ways, with, maybe who needs it more, who this game might be a little bit more important for. But this is from @Oliver. It's either @Oliver Knight LYG or @Oliver Knightley G. I'm going to go with Oliver Knightley G. His question is, whose team's head coach is on the hot seat more, which I think is an interesting question, because I think from a fan base perspective, at least, I'm not saying from maybe a media perspective, but from a fan base perspective, I think both of these coaches' seats are a little bit warm, especially look at maybe what's happened with the, in the last few years under Mac Brown. I know the program's taken big steps and, it was second most wins in the ACC, all that jazz. But the way the last couple of seasons have ended is frustrated a lot of Carolina fans, to say the least. We've talked about that a ton this offseason. And then I'm not a Minnesota expert, but I know coming off a season that Minnesota has, PJ Fleck's been there a little bit longer as well, starting back in 2017. I think it's safe to say that his seat is a little bit warm too. But what is your thoughts, or what is your answer to this question?
I don't think either seat is warm. PJ had a top 10 team, number 10 team in the country in 2019. They won 11 games. Then there was the COVID year, which was a throwaway. So no one in that league even thought they were playing. Their commissioner said, we're not playing this year. And all of a sudden, they threw things together in October and started playing. So that's a throwaway year. In 21, they win 9 games. 22, they win 9 games. Last year, they fall back to 6 and 7. And they had bad quarterback play. That couldn't do you in. So Carolina had Sam Howell and went 6 and 7 a couple of years ago. So I don't think PJ's I don't think he's even on a warm seat. I think what he could do is a really bad year would get him on a warm seat for next year. Mm-hmm. But look, he's been there 8 years. This is his 8th year, I believe, and he's done a nice job. It's a program that has not had consistency at a nice level in a long time. If you go back and look, there was a time when Minnesota was one of the top programs in college football for quite a while. They had a lot of old-time national championships. So there's some pride there and there's some history there, but it's very old. And PJ gives them stability. He likes it there. He just moved into a new house. Doesn't have plans on leaving. And they have done a lot worse than PJ Fleck in the past, and they could do worse moving forward. So I think right now he's pretty stable. Plus, I've been reading a lot of their fan comments about the program, almost as if I was intuitively preparing for this question, because I didn't know you were going to ask the question.
Yeah, I did bring it up right before we recorded.
Yeah, but I've read a lot of their fans are not nearly as upset with him as Carolina fans are with Mac. A lot of their fans still do that road. They do the road the boat thing, which is a PJ. As far as Mac goes, I don't believe Mac's on a warm seat at all. I think it would be foolish to say he is on a warm seat. People are weighing too much on the negative slices of the 5 years. And one thing that's come up a lot lately, and look, Mac doesn't need me to defend him, and I'm not defending. I'm taking an objective, rational look at this thing right down the middle. But, well, he's failed because he hasn't come close to making the program a national title contender, which is what he said he was going to do when he took the job. This job changed dramatically when all the rules changed. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When NIL and an immediate portal came in and were intertwined, that completely changed the North Carolina job. Before that, he was recruiting very well. Now, a lot of the guys were knuckleheads. A lot of them are gone. A lot of them have not performed well. If you look at 4 stars coming in this program, a lot of them have not played to the level of their recruiting ranking, which either says a lot about the recruiting ranking, staff development, or says something about their judgment on kids they bring in. Who knows what it is? I think that's the case in a lot of places. You have a lot of 3-stars that are excelling at a high level everywhere in college football, especially right now because a lot of these kids were being graded during the COVID era when no one could really see them. So there were going to be more inaccuracies then than any other time. But Mac was on his way stacking a roster with high-level stuff and before the NIL and transfer portal thing merged. And when that happened, Carolina had to take several steps back because the money's not there. The money's not there because the fans don't care enough. If the fans were more passionate as a whole, there are plenty of very passionate fans that care tremendously. But if there were more of them, the collective would have been better, and they wouldn't have to be so choosy and picky in the transfer portal and also with recruiting kids because they don't want to bring in a kid that's going to be really good as a true freshman, and they're going to play him some, and they're going to invest a lot of time into him just to see the kid leave the next year for more money because they can't afford to keep him in school at Carolina. Yep. So there are a lot of things at play here. So I wanted to get that out there because too many people are going black and white on this, and I'm not a giant gray area guy, but there's a massive gray area here when you look at it that way.
Yeah.
The other thing is Carolina's second in overall wins, second in ACC wins since he arrived. They went to an Orange Bowl, first time major bowl in 71 years. He's had 3 different teams ranked at some point in the top 10. And you have the last 2 years with the collapses, 9-1 in a collapse, last year 6-0 in a collapse. My point is this, and I have something that I did. I've done so much content leading up to the opener. We haven't run it yet. It's either a podcast or in a written piece. But the baseline, I think, for Carolina right now is that fork in the road. The fork in the road was losing at home to Georgia Tech 2 years ago at 9-1. Last year, losing at home to Virginia at 6-0. I kind of think that's the baseline because if they beat Minnesota, there's a really good – and Kirk Herbstreit said it yesterday. There's a really good chance that they find themselves in that situation again. And I have that as one of my podcasts, that one of my drops that's coming up. They very well could be, 7 or 8-0, whatever it is, going to Tallahassee. Now, Tallahassee may not be what we thought it was. Who knows? We got a lot of football
TBD
between now and then. But that's the baseline. So do they let's say they lose to Tallahassee, then they got what? Wake, BC, NC State. So how do they close that? They lose at that fork in the road moment. Does that steer them in a different direction, or does they just stay at the fork before they go in either left or go right? They've gone left the last couple of years. Will they go right this year? So I actually think the baseline right now is pretty good, but there's been nothing shown that right now that this group can get them past the baseline, what is right now the baseline. You cannot believe that until you see it, and they know it. Nobody's more frustrated about it than Mac, and you spent all off season squeezing every drop out of all this to figure it out, and we are not going to know until we get into November and how they navigate November, because they could lose 3 of their last 4.
Oh yeah,
they could lose a BC. They could lose a BC. Absolutely, it's going to be November 23rd. The average temperature is 38 degrees at 5 o'clock in Chestnut Hill.
Nobody wants to be up there at that time.
With wind and damp and rain and stuff. And then they got State.
Yeah, who knows?
I wouldn't pick them to beat State until they do beat State, right?
No, I'm not. Yeah,
the way they've lost to State has been in pathetic fashion the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to have that chance again. So if the same thing occurs, I don't think Mako is ever going to be on so much a warm seat, because the people that would determine whether or not he stays are not people on Twitter and on Facebook and on our message boards. Those people are a lot more secure with what he's doing. And I do believe that ultimately he'll call the shots on when he leaves.
Oh, I agree. I think it's always been the case. Yeah, no, I think you answered that question right. I think to answer that too. I don't think he's on a hot seat from the decision makers or people internally. No, I don't think that's a question at all. But I do think if Carolina has another not so great season, or again maybe gets to that fork in the road again and takes that same path it's taken the last couple of years, the hot seat that's already a bit warm from the fan base, I think is going to increase, because we can't sit here and act like it's not. I mean, the amount of tweets I see and stuff I see on the boards and about just, need to switch things up, or, Mac's not going to be able to, can't do this, can't take it forward. I'm looking at 3 tweets right now that talk about that. I think that's going to continue to heat up. But again, if you're asking the question from internal decision, like which coach is going to get fired first, I don't think you're either.
I don't see either one of them unless they doing things outside the rules of the contract. I don't see either one of them getting.
No, I completely agree. So it's
PJ goes 0-12,
yeah, exactly.
Mac goes 0-12. Mac has
Obviously
enough decency, he'll walk away.
I don't think
neither one of them are going 0-12. They're both going to be sniffing at a bowl game at the minimum.
Yeah, I agree. But appreciate Oliver Knightley for it. It's a good question. It's an interesting question too, because I think there's different ways you can look at it. I think you can set, especially with what we do, you entrenched in the fan base and what they see. I think there's.
Let me throw something else in there. This is going to be really bad. People are going to think that I'm shilling for Mac, and I'm really not. It's a reality. No.
I think you're speaking facts.
Going back to when Mac left the first time. Mm-hmm. When was the last time Carolina did finish the season strong?
It's a fair point too.
It only happened a few times. I mean, Larry Fedora's teams finished terribly at the end. They also started terribly.
Yeah.
The baseline the last couple of years for Larry was terrible. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now the baseline is late October. You're in position to have an incredible season, and then it goes the wrong way. So what you have to do is you have to get past that. You have to step over that puddle, get onto the other side, and see how much further you can push the baseline. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's what the season's about to me.
Agreed. Couldn't agree more. Second question, this will be the last one. We'll wrap this thing up. This is from I guess it's at MERKE15. I'm gonna say at Murky15. Who is I think it's an interesting one too. Who is the player on defense that will benefit the most out of Jeff Collins's new look defense in week 1? And I think it's a tricky one too, because it's hard to pick one guy. I think you can maybe look at groups and kind of analyze it and say this group could be better, in week. He's also basing this on week 1 alone. So he's not basing on the entirety of the season with this question. But I do think there may be some guys you can pick out and say, yeah, maybe he benefits and maybe he has a little bit better every year. Maybe he plays with a little bit more freedom than he has in the past couple of years, and with the scheme being a little bit different. But for you to answer it, Age, is there anybody that, if you had to pick one guy, is there anybody that stands out or somebody that first comes to mind?
First name comes to mind is Des Evans.
A lot of talk about him this offseason, man. A lot of talk.
Des will acknowledge that he's not come close to living up to expectations. Jeff Collins, Ted Monachino have acknowledged that just in recent weeks publicly. So those conversations have been had. In order to acknowledge that publicly, and they have had those conversations, they had them a long time ago. Look, you came in with, look at the specs. I mean, he fits an NFL suit, right? The specs are there. And the trajectory hasn't been what it should be. And Des knows this. And these guys know it. Mac knows it. So what have they done with Des? It's not just the scheme. It's the way things are communicated. Because remember, Des has a new defensive line coach. Monachino was in the program last year as an analyst, but Tim Cross was the coach. And I'm not dogging on Tim Cross at all. But sometimes communication is just difficult between two people when it's not as difficult between one of those people and someone else that comes in. Des has said very clearly it's the way he's communicated to, from a Jeff Collins standpoint versus Gene Chizik, and from a Ted Monachino standpoint versus Tim Cross. They have simplified. They have given him a narrower scope than what he had before. Des, here are 4 things on your checklist. Don't just check those boxes. Fill them in, man. Mm-hmm. Fill them in and be Des. And with that, it's a little bit liberating for him. He's the one, and I've used this in some articles, he's the one that said playing for Jeff Collins, it's less systematic than it was under Gene Chizik. So by saying less systematic, I think he felt like he had to do certain things, whether that was totally in his wheelhouse or not, he had to do it. You wouldn't bunt Aaron Judge to move a runner along. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You're going to let the guy swing away and hit the ball 500 feet. So with Des, what they're doing is they're saying swing away, hit the ball 500 feet, drive it to the alley, to the gap, and knock in a couple runs. That's what they're saying to him. I think he's going to benefit the most out of not just the scheme, but the way the scheme is communicated. And with taking some stuff off his shoulders, which is liberating him to be a guy that he wants to be as a pro. And you know what this has done? He is less stressed now than he's ever been since he arrived in Chapel Hill. He's gotten his academic work, which has probably been something he's had to grind, but he got his degree. And he's kind of using this almost as like a pro contract here. I've heard the description of him as being a, quote, professional, unquote, the last 5 weeks more than I've heard about any guy that I've covered at UNC in years. Now, part of it's because it's sort of a new, different Des. He's taken that step forward. You're not going to say that about a guy who's always been that way because it's not new. We say new things a lot, right? But for Des, he is leading by being a professional. He is leading by filling in those boxes and not just checking them. And he's been more vocal, which means he's more confident. And he feels he feels a lot better about where he is in this moment in time. So I think Des Evans will benefit the most. And he's also got Bo Atkinson, who's just exploding and pushing him some. But I think you're going to see them both on the field some. They both have said they want to be on the field together at the same time. And Des even said, if he's on the field with Bo and Kamen Rucker, 3 best pass rushers on the team, I can't remember what the exact word was. He said something to the effect of like, man, that's going to be nasty.
Yeah. No. That's a great answer.
So Des Evans is my answer.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer. That's kind of where my mind went to. I'm not even trying to use that as a cop-out because when I first read this question, I was like, it was tricky because I'm looking around and I'm like, well, it's hard to really know until we actually see it. But when you analyze what's being said and what we've heard throughout fall camp, I think Des Evans is that guy that kind of answers the question for you because that's kind of been like you just talked about, AJ. The talk around Des Evans has kind of been what Murky 15 is asking right here. It's who's going to benefit, who's benefiting the most, who has a new little bit of a lease on life and belief in what they can do. It's always been Des Evans this fall camp. It hasn't really been anybody else. We've heard, Bo Atkinson, but he's a younger guy. And, there's always been intangibles that people like around him. But behind that, I mean, we haven't really had anybody else at least be singled out more than Des Evans has when it comes to kind of a brand new guy and a guy who can, like you talked about, they got people in the program talking about, the next level now. And that hasn't really been the case the last couple of years because of his, lack of consistency and production at times. So I'm going to agree with you on this one because for me, that's kind of where my mind went to based on what we've heard over the last month or so of fall camp. And I'll say this too, AJ, if Des Evans can have that kind of year, I mean, that's just a big boost for this defense, man, because that D-line, once again, AJ, we've talked about it, that until we see it, and I know Carolina fans feel the same way, this is still a group that has a lot. I will say this is still a group that has just about everything to prove because we saw it a little bit last year. We saw it at the start of the season last year, AJ, but it was not consistent and it fell off just like the defense started to fall off as the season went on. But this group, if they can have more production out of the likes of Des Evans and get guys like him playing at a higher level, the rest of the defense is going to benefit because it all starts up front in those trenches, man. So yeah, it's another fascinating, another interesting thing that I'm going to be paying attention to, when it starts on Thursday night, because again, these are where the questions lie. And we've talked about how important the trenches are. You're only as good as your big guys up front, man. So if Carolina's defense is going to be improved, those trenches got to be improved first and foremost.
To your point, we talked to Jason Jones last week. He's the cornerbacks coach. And we were talking about the corners playing more press coverage. Yeah. They're going to be at the line of scrimmage more. They're going to knock guys what they call off their landmark. They're not going to allow the easy access throws as much, but that means they're also going to be in one-on-one coverage a lot more. And he said, look, our guys can be great at covering, great sticking with somebody, but they're only going to be as good to a degree as the guys are up front. It is so much a unit. And if you have Des, if opponents have to prepare for an edge pass rusher, aside from Kamen, that you must have 6 sets of eyes on at all times, if as a figure of speech, not just Bo, but also Des, it's going to be far difficult for them to game plan. And they're not going to be able to weigh some of their offensive sets depending on who's lining up at end, whether it's Bo or Des. If they're both equally really good, it's going to challenge how the other teams approach some stuff. So, and it's going to enhance what the secondary does. And if the corners are able to cover and deal with scenarios where a quarterback has to throw the ball in the move or throw off the wrong foot or something like that because there's pressure, then the corners are going to know that they're going to be able to find the ball more and you're going to get more turnovers. It's not just a corner doesn't get picks, so therefore he's not a good corner. So much of it is what happens in front of him that leads to the picks. And if you're seeing more dying quails passed into the secondary, Carolina's going to pick more of that stuff off. And Jeff Collins' defenses have been good about forcing turnovers. He was the defensive coordinator at Mississippi State the year that they were number 1 in the country. And I believe they led the SEC in sacks and interceptions that year. Those things go hand in hand.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, do they ever, man? I mean,
so Des Evans being that guy is going to make the secondary better. It's going to make everything better.
Mm-hmm. You're 100% right, man. It's fast. I'm looking forward to it, man. I'm tired of talking football without actually watching.
I want something to talk about.
I'm so tired of talking about it with trying to figure out what's going to happen. When I'd rather just see it.
Uniforms. They practiced Friday night in the stadium, and they wore their actual uniform. The coaches wore what they're going to wear.
Oh, wow.
Full game simulation. They wore the uniforms. Of course, there's no photos because they're going to do their uniform reveal, I guess, tomorrow. Because tomorrow,
usually, I would say
right. It would be Tuesday because
Tuesday. They usually do it a couple days for the game. Yeah.
So, what uniform do you think? It's a gold out. I don't know if Minnesota's going to want to wear all yellow on national TV. Mm-hmm. That would be really ridiculous look.
Yeah.
I would hope Minnesota just wears all maroon. That'd be cool.
I would like that too. I think Carolina probably goes up there with the blue helmet, white. That's my prediction.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that's their best looking uniform.
Me too. I agree. The Stormtrooper uniforms have also not been great for Carolina for some reason.
I understand why Georgia Tech wore white yesterday, but Georgia Tech's gold helmets to me are one of the best in college football. They're vintage. I love Carolina when they wear the blue helmets white. That's such a sharp look.
I think you have to wear some kind of blue with that stadium with the, like you said, with the red, maroon, with the gold. I think the blue is going to pop because I thought one of the best, just is so off topic. It is on topic, but it's so random. But
always talk uniforms.
But I thought the Minnesota Carolina game in Chapel Hill, with the gold, Minnesota coming with the golden helmets. I think they wore the red pants and the white uni. Yeah. And I thought that was one of the best color games of the year, just the contrast and late.
I think they jumped their chrome helmets though. They actually did a uniform reveal. They've tweaked their uniforms. They've gone a little bit more old school Minnesota.
Yeah. I like those.
They have a yellow helmet. They've worn a white helmet before. They have a black helmet and a maroon helmet. I don't like the black look. Everybody if black's not your color, then don't wear black.
I agree.
But I do think, and if any Minnesota fans are listening to this, they'll love the fact that I'm mentioning the name Ricky Foggy, quarterback from the 80s, back when they used to play in the Metrodome.
Oh,
they played where the Vikings and the Twins played. They played
turf shoes,
for years. And the Dan Gladden crashing into the baggy fence out there, like a glad bag fence. But anyway, Kirby Puckett, Jack Morris, I can go on and on about the baseball teams there. That's where Dane Dorsett had like a 99-yard run on Monday Night Football against the Vikings. Anyway, totally off track there. They used to wear the gold pants with the maroon shirt and the maroon helmet with the yellow M and the yellow face mask. I'd be really cool with that. That's a good look.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the new unis now. Yeah, it's kind of like an Arizona State vibe to it now. It's more like
a little bit, yeah. But I want the Ricky Foggy uniform.
Yeah, bring those.
Everybody get this to PJ Fleck. Have them do an immediate, quick change. Go to the Ricky Foggy uniform and let's roll with that.
Bring it back, man. Bring it back, Minnesota fans. If there are
nobody on the planet is doing a podcast this week anywhere on the planet where Ricky Foggy's name came up except this one.
0% chance, and I think that is a perfect indication that we need to get on out of here, man.
I think you're 100% right.
Stuff. Went over an hour on this, which we always do, but again,
did we really?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So we lied.
It's easy to do. I always say
we do 37-minute promos for our site.
Yeah, so that probably doesn't help too much, but I'm going to do a 5-second promo for the site. Head on over, links in the description below. Get signed up if you haven't already. Heck, that might have been less than 5 seconds. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Appreciate you guys watching as always. AJ will be in Minneapolis later this week. We're recording this on Sunday. It's this week by now.
Later this week. Later Tuesday, so you're going to get an early THI has arrived in Minneapolis tweet.
Heck yeah, man. Enjoy that. AJ's got to get up there early so he can get in game mode just like the Tar Heels. So, yeah, fascinating one. And guys, if you think Carolina's going to, if you're looking forward to the game and or you think Carolina's going to pull out the win on Thursday night, go ahead and like this video below. Let's see how many we can get on this video. And we appreciate you guys watching as always. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell too, so you know every single time we upload. Make sure you do that too. The reason I'm saying that is, post-game press conferences obviously coming back when games start. So if you want to be notified when those go up, go ahead and hit that notification bell so you know every single time we upload a video. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks.